One. All right. Hey, welcome back to the Group Project Podcast. This is episode number 35. And I have Matthew Dix here today. Matthew, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Always an honor to be able to chat with folks like you.
So, I could read your bio here, but it might take me 10 minutes. So I just wrote, in a few words, I wrote, you're a best-selling author. You write fiction, nonfiction. You're a world-renowned storyteller. We'll get into that a little bit. And the reason I really wanted to bring you on is you're actually, you're in your 22nd year of teaching.
I am, yes. It's been a while.
So a fifth grade teacher, mostly at the all at the elementary level. And you're in is it Newington, Connecticut? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So tell me, how's the start of the year going for you? Or what's COVID look like there in Connecticut? Or what's the learning look like?
Well, we started in a hybrid model. So I had half my class for a week and then the other half for the next week. And while they were home, I was sort of teaching online in the afternoons to them while they were doing independent work at home. We're now all in. So I have all my class every day, in I guess as typical as you can make a COVID classroom. Everyone is spaced 6 feet apart and we're wearing masks at all times. And we spend a lot of time outdoors. They've changed my classroom considerably. I had a stage in my classroom with curtains and theater lights and a sound system, and all that had to get broken down to provide the space for the social distancing.
Oh, no.
So, I produce Shakespeare with my students every year, but this year we won't be producing a play because you just can't do that in COVID. So the room looks weird and it's not sort of what you typically expect an elementary school classroom to look like, but we're there and we're learning and we're laughing and trying to make the best of it.
So I'm sure that's got to be a bummer for you. And in terms of just the some of the things I'm sure you do with your kids with the Shakespeare and the plays. And let me back up a little bit. Here's how I learned about you. And I kind of mentioned this to you before the show. Is I had a guy by the name Trevor Reagan on about a month and a half ago on the show. And I asked him the question about what's been the best $50 purchase you've made in the last 6 months. And he said, I bought this book called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix.
If only it cost $50, that would be fantastic.
Well, I think he said, it's been a while since I had the interview, but he said, I bought the book and then I got the audio book and maybe he got the Kindle or something. I don't know.
Okay.
But he even said it wasn't quite $50, but
right.
He said that the story that you wrote or the insight that you gave was just completely changed his views on public speaking, on telling stories. So when he said that, and knowing in my role where I got to be a public speaker a lot of the times, and just knowing I mentioned you before the show, I just don't have a ton of self-confidence when it comes to telling stories. I knew I had to get that book, and I got it, and it blew me away, Matthew. I feel like it's going to significantly change my mindset to public speaking. So that's how I got to know about you was Trevor Reagan tell me about your book. And then I reached out to you and you very kindly said you would meet up with me. So tell me about, that's what we could talk about so many different things, but tell me, how did you get started on this storytelling thing and write books? And now you do your, we can talk about some of your accomplishments, but you do the coaching and all that stuff. So how did you get involved in storytelling?
Well, I was a novelist first. So I had been publishing novels since 2009. So I was sort of known as a writer, and I write columns for magazines as well. So my friends knew I was into, narrative writing of some kinds. And then the Moth, the sort of granddaddy of personal storytelling in our country and now around the world, they launched a podcast back in probably 2009, probably when my first book came out. And my friends pointed me to the podcast and said, you should listen to us. We think you're going to like it. And I did. And eventually they said, go to New York. They said, you've had the worst life of anyone we ever knew. So you should be able to tell great stories in New York. And that's sort of what I thought. I didn't go there to become a storyteller. I went there to sort of knock something off the bucket list. I'll go tell a story at the Moth, and then that'll be done and I can move on. And so I went, sort of on a whim to New York one night with my wife and dropped my name in a hat, which is what happens at these storytelling competitions. And as soon as I put my name in the hat, I prayed that my name would not be picked because, I was in New York and I was in a room with 250 hipsters who I assumed would hate everything I had to say. And they picked 10 storytellers over the course of these competitions, and they had picked 9 names, and my name had not come out of that hat. And I thought, I'm going home and I'm going to tell my friends that I tried, and I'm going to check this off the list. And then my name came out 10th, and it changed my life. I took the stage and I fell in love with storytelling the moment I began speaking into that microphone, really. That's the moment I suddenly realized I had found a place where I belonged. And I won that night. And I like competition. I like knowing where I stand at all times. I think of it as like a video game. There should be a score over your head in all of your life, letting you know how you're doing. And so I started going back and started telling stories in New York and then Boston and then eventually around the world. So it all started one night in New York, telling a story about pole vaulting in high school.
So I'm looking at the notes I took. Now this may need to be updated. You've been the 45-time Moth Story Slam champion and 6-time Moth Grand Slam champion. Are those numbers updated or they need to be raised a little bit?
It's 51 now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So just maybe tell us what those story slams are.
So you go to a place like a theater or a bookstore or a bar, wherever they're hosting these things, and someone's hosting the show, someone typically brilliant, someone I admire, and you drop your name into what we call a hat, which is really a tote bag, and they give you a theme, so you have to come sort of with an idea on what your story is going to be. There's no notes. You just stand on a stage in front of a bare microphone and tell your story. They pull names out of the hat. There could be anywhere between 20 to 50 names in the hat that night. So you have to get lucky. You have to get your name pulled out. And then you take the stage, and there's 3 groups of judges in the audience, and they assess you on a scale of 1 to 10, essentially, with decimal points in between. And they judge the story that they felt was the best that night. And everyone sort of has a different view of what a great story is. But you know if it was a good story, if it moved you or made you cry or made you laugh, and maybe all of those things, those tend to be the winners. So it's a great show, whether you get picked or not. I always tell people, I get paid now to stand on stages and tell stories and do keynotes, but the thing I like to do the best is to drive into New York and drop my name in a hat and maybe take a stage and maybe tell a story for free. And that is still the thing I like to do the most, despite the fact that, I could just go somewhere else and be paid and be guaranteed a spot. And the slams only give you 5 to 6 minutes, and other people will give me as much stage time as I want. But I like going to those competitions, and I like the community, and I have lots of friends in the community now. I like all those things. I miss it because of COVID. I haven't seen those people in almost a year. It's been almost a year since I've been in New York, and that's just about the longest it's been for a long time. So, but they're great. They're great events.
I got to imagine you walk in there, people probably, maybe they know when you're going to be there, maybe they don't, but you walk in there and suddenly, oh shoot, there's no way I'm going to win. Ringer showed up.
My wife says I'm extremely famous in the smallest circle known to man. So, in that tiny, tiny competitive storytelling world, you're right. If I walk into one of those slams, I tend to be a known person, but outside of that, if you're not familiar with the Moth or personal storytelling or any of those things, nobody cares. I'm a nobody.
Well, storytelling is so important. The more I get into leadership, and I'm a superintendent here in Iowa, and I just feel like it's if you know how to do it, it's a superpower. And I just feel like that's something they don't teach us in any educational leadership classes, how to tell a good story, but we know that you can really change attitudes, change perceptions. It's going to be a whole lot more effective if you're telling stories as opposed to putting up a a PowerPoint, just showing a bunch of statistics. So I'm going to ask you, I know you cover this in the book, but I want to maybe just your own words. What are the basics of telling a great story? You laid out so well in the book. I don't want to, I want people to read the book, but
Sure.
what are your thoughts?
Well, I always think the first thing you have to understand is what is a story, because I just don't think most people understand what that is. A lot of people think a story is essentially, I'm going to tell you some stuff that happened to me over the course of time, whether it be an hour or a work day or a weekend. And somehow that constitutes a story, which is really not a story. It's just an accounting of the events of your life. A story is about a moment in our lives of what I like to say transformation or realization, change ultimately. I used to think one thing and then some stuff happened and now I think a new thing. Or I used to be one kind of a person and then some stuff happened and now I'm a different kind of person. That's really what we're looking for. It's as simple as that. And so I always like to think that those moments in our lives, they're almost instantaneous always. There is a moment when you used to think something, and it might take a long time to eventually tread the path that leads you to the moment where change takes place. But when that change takes place, it really is sort of, wow, I think something new, or I looked in the mirror and I discovered I'm a new kind of person. And I call them 5-second moments because they really almost always transpire over that amount of time. And I think that helps people because I think people tend to think of stories as I have to find a crazy series of events that took place in my life, rather than I just have to find a moment when I suddenly saw myself, my wife, my child, my student, my boss in a new light, or I suddenly thought something different about the world that I didn't think before, or I used to be a better human being than than I am today. Like the realization that, boy, I have really descended the moral ladder on this issue, haven't I? All of those things amount to stories, but it just means finding a moment. And once you find that moment, that's the idea of what you have for a story. And then the story gets crafted around that moment. The moment is always going to be the last thing you say. It's the most important thing you say. So anything said after that will be irrelevant to anyone listening. So once you find that moment, you find the end, and that's great. Finding the end of a story is fantastic because stories tend not to end in this world. People tend to tell stories until bells ring or until phones ring or until time runs out or the bus shows up. No one really sort of sits down or is chatting with a friend and thinks, this is what I want to share. Now I just have to find a way to get to that place, and provide the context that my audience, whether it's one person or 1,000 people, the context they need to understand what that moment meant to me. That's the goal in storytelling, is to find those moments. And if you just do that, you're better than most people. I mean, I wrote a whole book full of techniques. I'm halfway done another book on techniques. So there's a lot to be said about it. But ultimately, if you just do that simple thing, you're going to be better than most people.
So how do elementary teacher, if you're with fifth graders now, I got to imagine I would just love to be in your class, just to see some of the stories you tell. How do you use stories in your setting? What, I'm sure you use it a lot more than the average teacher. So tell me what goes through your mind when you're lesson planning or when you're thinking about incorporating stories into the classroom.
So they're told constantly. And it's either stories about myself, stories about former students, or fictional stories that I'm using to propel a lesson forward. So I tell personal stories all the time to connect with my students, to make it so that they can feel like they can talk to me. The first day of school, I always tell the story about going off a diving board at a pool party with all of my classmates at the end of the summer. And I hadn't tied my bathing suit before I went off the diving board. So I ended up leaving my bathing suit behind, and I was in a swimming pool completely naked, surrounded by my classmates. And I always tell that story on the first day of school because I want my students to know that I am going to bare my soul to you. I'm going to tell you about my most embarrassing moments because they're going to encounter the same problems. Every year, at least half a dozen girls in my class come to me and say, Mr. Dix, I just had my first period. And I'm an elementary school teacher. There's nothing but women around me. And there's women always like within eye shot. And yet the girls come and they tell me. And I know why they tell me. It's because I share so many of those stories from my life, the embarrassments and the struggles and the shames, that it affords them the opportunity to connect with me. And so when I tell them that I spent time in jail, that's when the boy comes to me and tells me his uncle's in prison or his father's in prison and he's never been able to tell anyone that before. Or when I tell them that I was homeless for a period in my life, the young lady comes and tells me she's in the back seat of the car at night and her mother's in the front seat, and we're able to get that family out of the car. And so often kids come to school and they don't understand that we can be a vessel for the things that they need and be a vessel for the things they need to say. And so I make myself available in that way, personally. And then I tell stories about former students as lessons. I had this amazing moment happen just this couple weeks ago. I made a plan for a parent to come in and meet with me with their child outside on a picnic table, because that's what we do in COVID now. And then the principal announced we could kind of go home early. It was one of those PD days. And my buddy texted me and said, "You want to go play golf right now?" And I thought, oh, I got a meeting in an hour with a family. And I thought I could cancel the meeting. I could make an excuse and go play golf with my buddy. And I made the morally correct decision, which was surprising, frankly, because golf was involved. I said, no, I can't play. So I sat out there on the picnic table. I met with this family. And when I was done the meeting, I was thinking about golf and how I could have been golfing. And I stood up and there was a young woman standing behind me. And I recognized her, but I couldn't quite place her. And she said, "I'm Felly." And Felly was a student of mine from 10 years ago. And she had been sent home from college because of COVID. And she came to the school to say hi to me. And when my student who I had been sitting with his parents, when he heard the name Felly, he said, "That's the Felly you've told us stories about?" Now, we were only a month into school, and I'd already told 2 Felly stories because she's amazing and she's story-worthy. She's done amazing things. And Felly said, "You told them stories about me?" And I said, "Felly, I have 6 stories that I tell every year about you." And she was so happy. And she had her boyfriend with her, and she slapped her boyfriend and she said, "You see, I knew he'd remember me." And I told her all the stories that I tell every year. She remembered 5 of the 6. The one she couldn't remember was just something she said to me that was fleeting to her, but really meaningful to me. And all of the Felly stories teach kids lessons, the mistakes that Felly made, the achievements that Felly achieved, all of those things. So I use student stories all the time to guide my students to learn from the past, to learn from mistakes, and to understand why kids succeeded while others didn't. And then I also use fictional stories all the time. So on Friday, my principal walks into my classroom. I'm teaching my kids how to add decimals. And in the center of the smart board, there's a decimal problem. There's a addition of decimals. But around the problem, there's a little girl on a parachute. I've drawn a stick figure of a girl on a parachute, and she's floating down to the ground. And below her, there's water. And inside the water, there's like a decapitated head of someone, because I've drawn little X's so you can tell the person's dead. And there's a shark in the water. And there's a big boat on the other side of the decimal problem. And he says, "What is this?" And I said, "Well, we're doing decimals. We're learning to add and subtract decimals. And every time they stay focused and they do a good job, I add a little bit to the story." So I said, "So that's Tyree. She's on a parachute. She's parachuting into the water. She doesn't realize there are sharks here. That's Kyle. He didn't realize there were sharks either. So all that's left of him is his head. And this boat, which hasn't come into view yet, Caitlin's on that boat, and it's called the Child Hating 2. It's a ship designed to ruin children's lives because Caitlin wants to ruin children's lives." And he just looked at it and he went, "I'm just going to walk away." But what he didn't understand, I mean, he does understand because he didn't tell me to erase it, was I'm just telling kids hilarious stories where they are characters in ridiculous situations, and it engages them in decimals. And I do all of that and a million other things. And that's just what teachers should do, I think.
Oh gosh. Oh man, I want to be in your class. I gotta see. I mean, like you said, I mean, you do these things professionally, and the fact that these kids get to see you, 180 days a year. I know it's a weird year, but for free is just like, oh my gosh, that would be so much fun.
They're not always happy. I'm not, there. There was the moment I stood on my chair on Friday and let them have it, because we all share the same bathroom right now because of COVID. We're bubbled, and so I have to use a bathroom that the children use, and I couldn't take it anymore. So standing on a chair and railing at them at how disgusting they are as human beings was not their happiest moment. But I'll tell you, the kids who are not disgusting, they were pretty happy that I was like letting those kids who can't pee on seats know how I felt about them.
And you're not afraid to like kind of toe the line with some topics that might get a little bit, the kids might get a little bit weird about, but that's probably that grade. They just love hearing that stuff. And
yeah, but I did it in 3rd and 2nd grade too. I'm
sure.
very direct. Every year we take our students, except for this year, we take them to outdoor education 4 days and 3 nights over, at a YMCA camp. I take all the kids out there. And a few years ago, we had a new nurse, and it was her first time going up there with us. And it's a Tuesday through Friday thing. So on Friday, she pulled me aside and she said, I have to tell you, on Tuesday, I just thought that the way you spoke to children was so terrible. I was thinking, I have to call DCF on this guy. He's just so direct, is what she should have said. But she just had never heard someone be so blatantly, unfiltered honesty with children, which is how I am. And she said by Friday, she said, now I understand. She said, they all get it. They all understand that when they do great things, you tell them they do great things. And when they do terrible things, you unabashedly tell them that was a terrible thing that you did. And I'm very direct about it, and I'm not afraid to punish. And the kids respond exceptionally well to honesty. And I do believe that so often in education, we dance around the edges, and it does nothing for children. It does not help them in any way. And so I drive the point home, whether it's great or whether it's terrible, all the time. And I don't have any problems with it. I don't have pushback. People just understand it.
So you are, in your book, you talk about what I'm just amazed with right now in these last just 10 minutes is you've rattled off like 5 or 6 stories, and it's just natural for you. And you do this all the time, but in your book, you talk about if somebody's struggling to come up with stories, the one thing I'm thinking of is your spreadsheet technique, where you write down the story of the day. Can you share that a little bit? Because I can picture somebody listening to this and saying, well, Matthew's got all these awesome stories. I don't have anything that I
Right.
can share. So talk about that spreadsheet. I thought that was such a cool little habit that you have.
So I call it homework for life. It's something you should do whether you're looking for stories or not. It'll change your life. That's not hyperbole. Essentially, all I do is, well, let me back up. The reason I started it was when I was telling stories on stages, I never wanted to be one of those people who rolled out the same 12 chestnuts every night. Those storytellers exist. I know them. I know all 12 of their stories, and that's all they've got. And I wanted to be a person who always brought new content to the stage every time. And my list was running out. I had a long list. I've had a very unusual life. So admittedly, the list was long to begin with. But eventually I realized I'm going to run out of content if I don't do something. So I gave myself this homework assignment first. I said, at the end of every day, I'm going to ask myself, what is my most story-worthy moment? Which is to say, if I was forced to take a stage and tell a story about something that happened on this day, even if the thing I'm going to ultimately tell is not story-worthy, is not worth anyone's time, I'm still going to find the thing that is the most story-worthy of all the unstory-worthy moments from my day. And I'm going to write it down. I don't write the whole thing down because that's crazy. That's a journaler, right? Those are people who write a lot after they get broken up with and often don't write anything when they're back in love. I use a spreadsheet. So it's 2 columns. The A column has the date and the B column has the story. And I only allow myself the B column to fill in the story. That way it becomes a habit, like brushing your teeth. It's something you don't skip. My goal was 1 new story a month, 12 new stories a year. That would be fantastic. Instead, what I discover is our lives are filled with stories, mine and yours and everyone else's. I'm not special in any way. Thousands of people do homework for life now, and I've never had a person report to me that it doesn't work. And instead, they tell me it's life-changing. Because what happens is, even if you don't want to be a storyteller, even if you don't care to tell stories in any way, the problem is we live our lives as if they're meaningless. We throw away our memories like they're trash. We'll walk down the street, pick up a quarter, put it in our pocket, but someone will say something to us, or we will see something that changes the way we look at the world or the way we think about ourselves. And if we're lucky, we notice it. Most of the time we don't. And then we move on. And so we lose years of our lives. Just for your audience, it's a terrible game that you can play, but it's real. Take your age and subtract 12. Okay? That is the year I want you to think about right now. So for me, 48 minus 12 is 36. Think about that year of your life. How much can you say about that year of your life? You lived an entire year, right? Unless you got married or divorced or you had a baby or you moved, you probably don't have much to say. Now, if I gave you enough time and you thought long and hard about it, you might get a few things, which is to say you threw the year away. And that's how we live our lives. That's how I used to live my life. Instead, every day, I make sure that there's something from that day that is going to get written down. And what happens now is most of my days have 4, 5, 6, 7 items on the day. Moments that not are all story worthy, not all will ever make the stage. But if you have kids, that you've said a million times, oh, you're not going to believe what my kid said today. I got to write that down. And then no one writes it down. And then their kid is 22 and they say, I don't know where the time went. And I say, the time went and you just threw it away. You disregarded it as being important. And so Homework for Life attunes you to your life, and it doesn't work instantly. You're not going to see the things that I'm able to see after doing it for 8 years. But I'll tell you that people who start to do it and they practice it, suddenly they realize that their lives are filled with meaningful moments that they have either not noticed or noticed and threw away. And so I don't lose a day anymore. And it's a beautiful thing. And the other added benefit is you start to look at your life with this new lens that I call it. Suddenly memories will come flowing in. Your life sort of cracks open. And things you can't believe you forgot will suddenly reappear. And they end up on my Homework for Life too. So you start to fill in the gaps so that 36th year of my life that I may have lost, it will start to come back to me. Not in the way I wish it could, but in more of a way than it would if I wasn't doing Homework for Life. So that's basically what it is. If you Google the phrase Homework for Life, I have a TED Talk on it. It'll go into more detail, but no matter what you're doing, whether you're never going to write and never going to speak again, it'll change your life. It will make you feel like a more complete, important person. It'll connect you to the things that are happening to you in the world. It's the most important thing I will say in this interview.
Mm-hmm. That's so, that's awesome. Gosh, I remember reading that in the book, and I think you told an awesome story about maybe, and I forgot the book at home. I'm sorry, Matthew. But was there a moment where it was raining outside, you were with your dog at the
Yes.
corner, and you just stood there? Maybe just give us a 1 or 2 minute, give us that story if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, my dog, Kaylee, asked me to bring her outside at 2 a.m. by scratching on my bed, which was unusual at the time. She wasn't that kind of a dog. She didn't get up in the middle of the night, but she did. I had boxer shorts on at the time, but nothing else. And I had that decision, do I get dressed or not? And I live on a street that no one lives on except for me and 12 other people. You don't drive on it unless you live on the street, that kind of place. At 2 a.m, no one's going to be up. I know all my neighbors. So I decide I'll just go out in my boxer shorts. She'll pee really quick. We'll come back inside. And we do. She pees. I go to pull her back in, and she wants to go for a walk, which is weird. She's very old. She never wants to walk. She wants to go to the end of the street, which I can see from where I'm sitting, so it's not that far away. But I have boxer shorts on, not even shoes. I say, all right, we'll go. I love her. I can't say no to her. We go to the corner, and I go to turn back towards the house, and she pulls again. She wants to go around the block. And this next street, the one I can see from where I'm sitting, not a lot of cars on that one, probably nobody on that one as well. But the third street that we're going to be on is Main Street in Newington, Connecticut. There will absolutely be cars and trucks on Main Street, even at 2 o'clock in the morning. And all I've got is boxer shorts on. But I can't say no to her. And I'm like, they kind of look like shorts. People will drive by quick. They won't even notice. Walk down the street. The birds are chirping. There's no moon or stars in the sky. It's totally dark. She's happy. She's like skipping, and she's old. She doesn't do this. So it's not until we get as far away from my house as possible on Main Street in Newington, when it's one of those moments where it's not raining 1 second ago, and now all the rain of the universe is falling on you at the same time. And suddenly I realize why the birds are chirping so loudly. They knew it was coming. I know why there's no moon and stars in the sky. And I'm on Main Street in my underwear with my dog. And had I not been doing Homework for Life, what I do is I probably pick up my dog, march home, take a shower, and 6 months later, I forget the whole thing ever happened. But because I'm doing Homework for Life, the beauty of it is that you start to look at your life in a new way. And so looking down at my dog, Kaylee, I realize she's very old. And every morning I wake up and make sure she's still alive. And this might be the last time I'm ever walking her in the rain, something we used to do forever. She's 16 at the time. And because of that, I stand on that corner and I just stay there in my underwear with my dog until she's ready to go. And then while I'm on that corner, my life cracks open, and I see a dog from my childhood that was my father's dog. And when my parents got divorced and my father was kicked out of the house and he was replaced by another man, he loses his house and he loses his farm and he loses his kids. I realized for the first time in that corner, he loses his dog too, because we kept the dog and he left without the dog. And suddenly I see my father's losses through the eyes of a man rather than a boy. And it seems like the worst loss of all. And then that memory disappears. And I have another memory of being on the 18th green at Walpole Country Club with a girl when I'm 18 years old. And we're both naked and the sprinklers come on. You know, the most fun I've ever had naked and, wet outside. And I'm thinking about it because now I'm naked practically and wet in public again, right? A memory I forgot completely. It was washed away and now it's back, right? All of that happens on the corner. And it ends up being the last time I walk Kaylee in the rain. She passes away, a few months later. And the beauty of it is, as I'm telling you the story, I'm not seeing you anymore because I'm back on the corner and I can see the stop sign and I can feel the rain and I can hear it and I can see the headlights going by and I can see my dog, my best friend, who's now been gone 2 years. Her ashes are literally right here in a can. But now I had a moment again where I got to return to that moment and see her and be with her in a way that we don't allow ourselves when we toss our memories away like they're worth nothing. So that's homework for life. That's what it'll do for you.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Hey, group project podcast listeners. Hey, you're getting the free stuff here from Matthew Dix. Normally, you got to pay to go hear him share these stories, but yeah, man, so cool. And that idea about the homework for life, because there are a lot of journalers. I journal, but you presented a different way of looking at things, and I feel like as I read your book, I felt like you were talking to me, because I often have those same excuses. My life isn't that exciting. I don't have stories to share. But it was just, you really do a good job of saying there are stories every day. If you're, and like you said, it's just that 5-second moment in time when you realize you used to do this and now you do that.
Yeah.
One of my questions, I want to try to focus on school leadership a little bit. I made the comment, and my question to you ahead of the show was, what's the biggest mistake you see from school leaders when it comes to public speaking? I don't know if, I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm not trying to call anybody, but, what do you see from school? You probably have a chance to see school leaders all the time. And what's the biggest mistake you see?
I want to give you two, so I don't have to pick between the two.
Okay.
The first is something Kevin Smith said in his book. Kevin Smith, the director and writer and actor in Clerks and other films, he wrote a book and he said that whenever you're standing in front of other human beings and speaking, for any reason whatsoever, your first job is to be entertaining. And I really believe that. And I don't think most school leaders believe that. It's interesting to me that someone would stand up in front of an audience of adults and just assume that everyone wants to hear what you have to say. I think the better assumption is to assume no one wants to hear what you have to say. In the same way, when I'm teaching, I always assume that I'm teaching to children who don't want to learn. Now, I know that 2/3 to 3/4 of my students are excited to be in class. But I also know that I was one of those kids who was not excited to be in the class. And it's easy to teach to the kids who want to be in class. I don't have to work hard to get them to pay attention, but I make damn sure that I have something to get everyone excited about during every lesson that I teach. I don't see school administrators taking that same approach during a faculty meeting or professional development. They just assume that we want to hear what they have to say. And they give us no reason to engage through humor or heart or story or anything. And so it's a weird assumption, I think, because they were once me. They had to be. And when they were me, they know that oftentimes they were in meetings thinking, I don't want to be here. I have a friend who says, I'm going to Matt Dix this meeting, which is to say, I'm bringing stuff to this meeting to be productive because I don't expect it to be productive. So they make the mistake in not being entertaining. That is a responsibility. The other thing they do is, because so many of them used to be teachers, they treat their employees, their teachers, as students. And I feel like they're speaking to me as if I'm a student. And as soon as they do that, I am done with them. I have no interest in someone who speaks to me as if I'm a child. That is the last thing I'm going to accept in this world. So I will find a way to either disengage or leave that meeting or do something else. I wrote an entire novel during the 3 years I had a terrible principal. In faculty meetings, I started writing lists to entertain my table mates. And those lists became a novel based entirely in lists that I wrote, at least initially, in faculty meetings that I determined had no relevance to me because the person in front of me was speaking to me as if I was a child. So I think those are the two biggest mistakes that they make. They assume that we want to hear them rather than giving us a reason to be excited about hearing them. And then they talk to us as if we're students, as if we're children, rather than the co-equal adults that we all are.
So one question I had written down was the single best tip to give others to improve storytelling skills. So would that be a different? I don't want to ask you to say, well, the two things I shared. Is there something else? What's like one quick tip you would give a school leader beyond those things, not that you just mentioned, that they could immediately improve their speaking skills the following day?
I think, again, I want to give two.
Okay.
I actually think vulnerability would be a wonderful thing to see school leaders do. Um, the same vulnerability that I express with students when I tell them about losing my bathing suit, right? And all the other stories of shame and embarrassment. Vulnerability draws people to you. There's sort of a misconception in the world right now because of the terrible leadership we have in the highest offices of the land, that bravado and braggadocio and speaking highly of yourself is recommended. Whereas the actual bravery in this world comes from the person who's willing to speak about the truth of themselves. When they're willing to speak about the time they failed, or the time they did something embarrassing, or the time they did something, really rotten even. Those are the people who actually possess courage. It is easy to say nice things about yourself. I'm never impressed by someone telling me about their accomplishments or lying about their accomplishments. And so if leaders understood that one of the best ways to connect to their people is to talk about their mistakes, to talk about their failings, to talk about their faux pas, it just draws people so close to you. And the other thing I always tell people is, when you're telling a story, whether it's a personal story or anything, what you have to say, what you feel you have to say, is kind of irrelevant to the situation. So many times we speak as if the audience is also ourselves, rather than thinking about what our actual audience wants from us. Because what I want to say about myself or what I have done is always different than what I know my audience wants to hear. I have lots of things that I think are interesting or fascinating, or can you believe this coincidence? But none of that means anything to an audience. So the idea that I have to strip away my own needs as a speaker and instead ask myself, what would the audience want from me as a speaker? And then craft my stories and craft my talks in that way, rather than the way that so many people speak, which is, I think this is interesting, therefore you will think this is interesting. I think these details are necessary, therefore you think these details are necessary. Those things are never true. That what we want and what our audiences want are always two different things. And the more you can get into the mind of your audience, the better off you're going to be.
Now you have classes. You've started you teach classes on storytelling, and you have seminars and all that. What I wish you were closer. I would I would be there, and I know you had to make some changes with COVID, but what do those, if somebody signed up for a storytelling seminar with you, what would be involved with that?
Well, they're all different. So, I always teach a workshop, a beginner's level workshop, we call it, where you don't have to do anything except listen to me. Sort of provides the foundation. Because so often when people want to learn about storytelling, they're terrified about having to share their truth in front of other human beings. So I create a very low stakes, don't speak if you don't want to environment that can entertain them, because you should be entertaining at all times when you're speaking, but we'll teach them the fundamentals. So when that they leave, they can start practicing these fundamentals with people who they trust. And then if you take a different kind of workshop, sort of our advanced workshops or things like that, that's going to be when you come in and either you have stories to tell, and I will critique the stories. And when I critique the story, I always have two goals in mind. Actually, I do the same thing in writer's workshop as a teacher. I want to help the storyteller improve their story. Now, when I hear a story, I can speak about 50 different things I would reconsider in that story, always. So I have to choose the 2 or 3 or 4 bang for your buck best ideas. But at the same time, I'm also using that story as the content for a lesson I'm simultaneously teaching. So I'm either pointing out something the storyteller has done brilliantly that we could all learn from, or I'm pointing out something that the storyteller missed that we all miss at times, and let's learn from it as well. So that's sort of how those workshops run. They run on the content of the participants. They bring their stories to me. I transform those stories into lessons to teach the rest of the group, and you leave with a better story also. And then I just do private coaching, and I work with a lot of corporations. So it depends. I might be working with a marketing team, or I might be working with a CEO. And so their missions and their motivations are all different as well. So it's whatever people really need, but that's sort of what it looks like.
So if you're doing a private session, I'm just curious, where do you start with that person? What's your approach?
Well, it depends what they have. So, I have someone working on a keynote, for example, and she said, "Can I send you my speech?" And I said, "Please don't. I really, first of all, on the page and speaking out loud, they're two different things. I have no desire to read your speech. Okay, write a book if you want me to read something. But I always start with, rather than telling me what you have, like, don't tell me your story, don't tell me your speech yet, just tell me, like, what you're thinking. Give me your 30-second, here's what I'm thinking about saying, here's what I'm hoping to convey, here's some examples I hope to use, or in the story, the same kind of thing. Like, give me the brief, summary of your story. And then from that, what I often do before we even start to dig into the actual material of the story or the material of the speech is to really talk about if your goal and your plan actually match, because they often don't. Or is your goal an actual goal, or is it four goals? Because we can't have four goals, we can only have one. The actual sentence by sentence construction of a story, which most people want the most help with, is the last thing I do, and it's the least important thing I do. Because in storytelling and in speaking, it really doesn't matter. I compete against a woman named Marta in New York all the time. Marta, her English is her third language. She has poor vocabulary, bad syntax, and terrible grammar, and she kicks my ass. And it's because she understands how to tell a story. And she also understands, or at least the audience understands, that it doesn't matter if your sentences are grammatically incorrect. What it really matters is there vulnerability in your story? Did you speak about something that's important? Did you have a moment of transformation or realization? Did you start in the right place? Did the beginning and the end have a conversation with each other? Did the beginning of the story pay off at the end? All of those things Marta does brilliantly. So often when I'm doing a private session, people want to dig into the sentences, and it's the last thing I want to do, and I often don't even bother to do it with them. Because once we have a plan and once we understand sort of the skeleton, of their talk or their story, the rest just falls into place. But it's so hard for people to sometimes deconstruct that process without some help.
Mhm. Going back to your workshops, do you offer those virtually now? Is that correct? So somebody here in the Midwest, where a lot of our listeners are at, could potentially sign up for one of your workshops.
Yeah, we do them all the time. I've wrapped up. I have two going right now with groups of people, and then they'll relaunch in January. We like I said earlier, we switched from a hybrid model of teaching to this all-in model of teaching, and so I basically put the brakes on launching anything else. My wife is also a teacher. She's a kindergarten teacher, so she's going through the exact same thing as me. We're in the same school district. So with COVID teaching, I have done a little less storytelling teaching in terms of workshops. I work with individuals all the time, but starting in January, there'll be lots more workshops popping up.
And they should just Google search your name. Is that Matthew Dix? And it'll
Yeah,
get to your the options there.
yeah, they can go there, or they can go to speakupstorytelling.com. That's our company. And and all the workshops will be posted there too. I didn't think I would enjoy the online teaching at all. I resisted it for a very long time, but I had partnerships with theaters, and the theaters said, "Will you still come and teach virtually?" And at first I said no, and they talked me into it. And it's not as good as in person, but the amazing thing is I teach people all over the world now. I have a workshop running that has someone in Taiwan, someone in Australia, and then people all over the country. And we all come together at 7 p.m. Eastern time or 8 p.m. Eastern time, whenever it works for me. Essentially, they find a way to make it work. And I get to teach people all over the world now. So it's a silver lining in what otherwise is a lousy time in this country.
And so the people who sign up for your courses do they have all kinds of different backgrounds and professions?
Yeah, yeah. And some of them come because they just want to tell stories. And many of them come because they have a particular purpose in mind. I have a person who's looking to raise money for a cause that he cares deeply about. And so he's generating stories for that purpose. I have a guy right now in a workshop, he's doing it for dating because he can get a first date, but he can't get a second date because whatever he says on the first date doesn't work out very well for him. So he's like working on stories that he can use when he's out on a date and he wants to try to get that second date. So lots of people come for lots and lots of different reasons. Oftentimes there's someone there who doesn't know why they're there. It's because like their spouse sent them because their spouse can't stand them anymore. And so I'm helping them refine their skills. So whatever your reason is, that is the thing about storytelling, is that I have yet to find a profession or a person for whom storytelling can't be beneficial.
Mhm. So you just reminded me, and I won't spoil it for the audience, but you talk about your dating story with your wife in your book, and how you hooked her after the date number one, I believe, right?
I did. I didn't know that at the time. We had been teaching together for a year, more than a year at that point. She had been engaged. I was married at the time when we met. She was about to get married to someone. Our first conversation ever was about her wedding, because I'm a minister and a wedding DJ, and I was actually giving her advice on her wedding. That was our first conversation ever. And about 2 years later, we both found ourselves single and very close friends. And yeah, we went on. It wasn't a date, really. It was a school talent show was happening, and we had an hour to kill. So we went to Chili's for dinner. The first time we went to dinner together. And what happens, you've noticed it now, that if you ask me a question, I tell you a story. And that's what happened at dinner that night. And I didn't know till years later, someone said, when did you first know that Matt was the one? And she said, that dinner at Chili's. She said, he told me things about himself that were amazing, and the way he told me them. And I just realized I wanted to hear more from this person. So yeah, storytelling can get you the best spouse too.
So there you go. If you're single out there, hey, we got some sign up for Matt's workshop there, and you'll probably find the person you've been looking for.
I've actually done specific workshops just for dating. Storytelling for dating. Yeah. So it's always guys, no offense, gentlemen, but I've never had a lady come and need help. I'm sure they're out there, but so far it's just a bunch of guys.
So you mentioned the wedding DJ, minister, writer. You've written 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 fiction books. At least you got another book coming out. You do everything. You're a teacher. You're a family man. You got 2 kids. Let's talk about how do you get all this done? How are you so productive?
Well, I'm writing a book about it right now called Someday is Today. It's the question I get asked the most, and it's impossible to answer really, because there's a lot of answers to it. So that's why I'm writing the book. But, essentially it comes down to the idea that I don't think people make decisions about the way they use their time. When I was 22, I was robbed in a restaurant, a McDonald's restaurant that I was managing at the time. And I had a gun to my head, and I couldn't get the safe open. And they told me they were going to shoot me in the head if I didn't open it. And then they went and put my head on the ground and put a gun to my head and pulled the trigger several times. And I knew I was going to die that night. Now, I didn't, but I really believed it. So I understand what it is like to be on the brink. And I understand the regret that filled me. I didn't have fear. I didn't have anger. There was nothing left in the end but regret for the things I hadn't done. And I do think that what happens is we just don't make active decisions about the way we spend our time. I think we tend to follow the path of least resistance. We're like water. We just trickle through life, bouncing off whatever we can bounce off. And if we become cognizant of the idea that time is our most valuable commodity, which people say but don't really believe, because they will chase a dollar bill down the street, but they will fiddle away an hour like it was nothing. And that doesn't make any sense. That is illogical in every way, and that's how people live their lives. And so if you just decide, not even there's good decisions. My book will teach you how to make the best of those decisions, but just to actually make decisions about the way you spend your time, because most people don't. And the question I always ask myself is, does the 100-year-old version of myself want to spend this day? Because the current version of myself, right, the 48-year-old version of myself, I basically want to spend my day playing golf, eating cheeseburgers, having sex, and watching a movie, right? The 100-year-old version of me doesn't really want me to spend the day like that, though, right? The 100-year-old version of me might say, there's nothing wrong with all of those things, but please don't use the whole day. Play 9 holes of golf instead of 18, and make it quick, and And maybe 3 cheeseburgers a week, for God's sake, because, like I think of it that way though. Like, what does the 100-year-old version want me to do? Well, that person wants me to wrestle with my kids, which is what I was doing until 3 minutes before this interview, right? I wrestled with my children until 3 minutes before. I wrestled like hell, like we kill each other, and it was fun. And I spent 2 hours today working on a book because that's really important, and I spent this morning riding a bike and playing golf. And I spoke to my friend for 45 minutes today because I hadn't seen him in a long time. Those are the ways that we choose to spend our time. Now, I would love to just go in the other room. I have a beautiful television. I'm in the middle of Better Call Saul, a show I really enjoy. I would binge watch it all day long on this day off that I have, this unusual election day off. But the 100-year-old version of myself would say, really, you binge watched a show? That's how you spent your time. A show that, by the way, when you're 100, you'll have no recollection of. In fact, next year, I probably won't have a recollection of it, right? Not a deep recollection. And will I feel good about it? Will I be like, thank goodness I watched Better Call Saul, right? No, there's nothing wrong with watching the show. If I'm sitting with my wife and we're leaning up against each other and we're chatting about the show and laughing and we're spending an hour watching it, that's one thing. But to sit in a room by yourself and binge watch a show, you're a fool if you think that that's the best way to spend your time. We don't make decisions about the way we should spend our time. Even if your decisions are bad, if you're making a decision, you're better off than most people, because most people just model through the path of least resistance.
So that's going in your new book. Is that right? Is that?
Yes.
Oh, and so what's the new book called? Is it? Or
it's called I'm writing it right now. It's called Someday is Today.
Someday is Today. I want
to
read.
It's the idea that everyone always says they're going to get to something someday. And then what happens is quite literally they die. Like everyone has something they want to do someday. And instead they never do it and then they die. And that's how most people live their lives. Man. As terrible as that sounds, that is absolutely how most people live their lives.
I love that. Oh God, I'm gonna pre-order that for sure. So hurry up, get that finished. I want to read. To read.
It's under contract, so I actually have to write it. I can't sort of avoid it.
Oh, wow, that's so good. Hey, I'm gonna dig into some of these quick hitters here with you.
Sure.
But knowing you, hey, if you got a good story that goes with it, go for it. And I feel honored. You talk about making sure you the best use of your time. I feel honored you're giving up an hour plus with me. So,
well, no, this is a very good use of my time. I enjoy talking like this, and I know that I'm reaching, many people, which is going to be a wonderful thing. And actually, so often when I have these conversations, the first thing I do is I go into the other room and I write down a few of the things that I said. It's sort of an opportunity to think out loud, and those think out louds end up on the pages. So I'm always looking for ways to sort of maximize the time spent, and I will maximize this time spent. It's been lovely.
Awesome. Well, okay, let's dig into these scripted questions here, which is, okay, if we are in, I'm going to make sure I say it right, Newington, Connecticut. And I know Connecticut's not a huge state there. I'm not sure where Newington's at, but if we're ever in Newington, Connecticut, where is one place we've got to check out?
So I'm going to send you like 2 towns over rather than Newington. It's a place called Gillette Castle. It's an actual castle in Connecticut. It's pretty amazing. It was built by a wealthy man of the Gillette family, not the Gillette razor company, but another Gillette family. And it's a legitimate castle on top of a hill with hiking trails. And it's just amazing. It's a strange thing to find a sort of a medieval castle in the middle of your state. And it's on the river. And at the bottom of the hill, there's a ferry that will take you across the street for some great ice cream and hot dogs. But yeah, it's a castle, and you go inside, and my kids love it, and I love it. So Gillette Castle, that's where you go.
Oh, that's awesome. And so I'm looking at, I should have done this before we started. You're right outside Hartford. Is that correct? Or you're?
Yeah. Okay. I'm right in the middle of the state.
Okay. Oh man, when you threw on I'm a huge ice cream fan, and just all that, and then finish off across you just made it sound amazing there. Like, there's not much of that going on in Iowa. I got to say that. So, very cool. Okay, so next question is, what is the best up to $50 purchase you've made in the last 6 months?
Well, it was given today to my wife. I just think if you have $50 to spend, the best way to spend it is on someone else. You will feel better about it. It's another one of those decision-making things. You can buy something that you'll forget where you bought it, or you can give your loved one something. So when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, it devastated my wife. She's loved that woman all her life. And she was she was a mess for a few days. And so what I did is I started buying as many Ruth Bader Ginsburg items as I could find, because I wanted to give them to her on election day, because I knew this would be a day fraught for her as well. So today I had a box with a ribbon on it, and I handed it to her a couple hours ago, and it had a Ruth Bader Ginsburg bauble doll and some Ruth Bader Ginsburg socks and a book of quotes and a poster of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg ABCs, based upon her life, and a million other little things that probably amounted to about $50. But it was a box full of trinkets, and I gave it to her today because it was election day, and just wanted to make her feel good about that. And whatever I wanted to buy for myself would have been irrelevant compared to that. I just think that the value of giving someone something is always going to supersede giving yourself something.
Sure. What is the one book that has greatly influenced your life?
The book is Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. It is a book that every teacher should read, and I read it without exaggeration every year. I either listen to it or read it. It is a book that teaches you why certain ideas stay with people and why other ideas don't. It's a storytelling book. They didn't write it as a storytelling book, but it's absolutely a storytelling book, but it's the best teaching book that exists in the world. Better than anything on any of your shelves in any of your classrooms. It teaches you the 5 strategies that make things memorable to human beings, which is ultimately what teachers have to do, other than the really important things, which are we're building character and we're teaching kids grit and persistence and kindness. Those are all the most important things. But whatever your subject area is, right now I'm teaching decimals, right? Adding and subtracting decimals. That is a concept I need to stick into their heads. And there's 5 ways to do it, or 5 big principles. And that is the book to learn how to do it.
So I was going to ask you, and you kind of answered my question, because I loved your book. I love Storyworthy. I've read Made to Stick. It's been a couple of years, so I'm going to need to go read that. Is there any other book that you can refer listeners to in terms of storytelling that you've picked up something from, or that you feel like kind of fits your philosophy?
A hard question. I had to read all of the storytelling books. When you write a book and you're pitching it to a publisher, you have to sort of offer up the comparables, the books that are, comparable to your book. And I was not happy with any of the storytelling books I read. The problem is that the people who write the books are not teachers. The only benefit I have, the only reason I've been successful in this is I'm an elementary school teacher for 22 years. So I take a large concept and I break it down into small repeatable parts that people can understand, which is what I do when I'm teaching adding and subtracting of decimals, right? All of these things. And the people who write the books, they're great storytellers, and they either tell you what they do, which is not necessarily going to work for you unless you are them, or they take your story and they fix it, but you have to go back to them every time to get it fixed. There's no one really thinking about it in terms of curriculum. Like, here's how to build it from the base up, and I write my book in such a way that if you read half the book, you're still going to be okay. Like, the most important principles are taught up front, and the further you go in the book, the lesser of importance those principles come, the same way we build curriculum. So I wasn't happy with any of the books. I guess the thing I would recommend to people is I would read Stephen King's On Writing, which is brilliant. It's one of those books, again, I listen to it every year. It's the best book on writing that there is. It's filled with autobiography as well. I wanted Storyworthy to be the on writing of storytelling. King writes about, writing fiction and writing nonfiction, but it's great and it's simple and it's straightforward, and it's certainly been helpful to me in terms of a storyteller as well.
I spent maybe 2 hours between Amazon and standing at Barnes & Noble trying to find a book that I felt covered storytelling like you did in your book, and I couldn't find anything. I think you're onto something. I just feel like there's such few, and Made to Stick is a great example too. So I guess if you're out there listening, that's where I'd point you as well, is Matt's book, Storyworthy, and then Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. 2 really good books to check out there. One more question about books. You've written a handful. What is your favorite book that you've written?
Well, it's like asking me to pick between my children, which is really hard. I really can't. My wife will tell you that my wife will tell me to say, I should say Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend. It is my most successful book by far. It's been published in 30 countries. It's the one that people tend to really love when they start reading it. But my last book, 21 Truths About Love, is a book written entirely in lists. It's just list after list after list, which tells the story of an obsessive list maker. And I love that book because I know I wrote it in faculty meetings. But I love my first book because it's the one that broke me. It's the one that got me into the publishing. So it's hard to pick one. It's really challenging.
So was your first book Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend?
No, my first book was Something Missing. It's the
Okay.
story of a thief, a burglar who breaks into people's homes, but only steals things that would not be noticed as missing. So he comes into your house and just steals small things that you don't even really know you own. And you become a client of his over time. And he starts to care about you. And he eventually weaves himself into your life in odd and oddly helpful ways. So that was my first book. So it sort of has a real precious place in my heart. Actually, the real answer to the question is my second book, Unexpectedly Milo, is probably my favorite book, but it's my least successful book. So it's very hard. It's a Sophie's Choice question. There's really no answer.
I think I wrote down the books you've written. I think we've hit all of them. I want to make sure I list them. The Perfect Comeback of Caroline Jacobs. Is that the one I'm missing right now?
Yeah,
Or
that's
is
the
there
one
a
we
couple
haven't
more?
mentioned. No, that's the one we haven't mentioned. I have another book coming out in January called The Other Mother.
Sure.
That's my next novel. But yeah, the Perfect Comeback of Caroline Jacobs is my first female protagonist. So I kind of love it for that reason. It's read in high schools quite a bit right now. So that's fun. It's nice. Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend and The Perfect Comeback of Caroline Jacobs have crossed over into the YA market. So having some of my students and former students reading my books has been pretty exciting.
Okay, we're going to bounce back into school leadership here for a second. My question that I ask all guests is, what is one piece of advice you have for aspiring or new school administrators?
I have to learn about management. um, I just watch my principals. What happens is you're a teacher, and then you're maybe a good teacher, but at least a politically savvy teacher, and you climb the ladder to whatever that next spot is. In our district, it's like a curriculum specialist. And if you do a good job with that, you might become a vice principal somewhere and then eventually become a principal. But no one ever taught you how to manage people. You were just a teacher who climbed a ladder, right? Now, I managed McDonald's restaurants for 10 years, which doesn't sound like much, but I'll tell you, I went through their management program and I understand about delegation and accountability and follow-up and motivating adults and 1,000 other management techniques that managing those restaurants helped me do. An extremely challenging job, harder than teaching, I will tell you right now. Managing a McDonald's restaurant with 60 people, half of whom don't speak English, who are all working for minimum wage that you have to somehow motivate to work really hard for you every day. It's the most challenging job I've ever done. And the management training program that they put me through was extraordinary. And what happens is I meet a lot of administrators, education administrators, who don't understand anything about management. And I find out, oh, well, I got my PhD in gifted and talented ed. And I think, well, it's not helping you, buddy, because you don't understand how to delegate a damn thing. And you haven't figured out how to prioritize. You don't even balance the budget of our school effectively. We ran out of paper in March. So like, these are things that would never happen in a corporate world, McDonald's or otherwise. And yet they happen in education all the time because we hire teachers who are either good at teacher or politically savvy enough to land in a position that they're not qualified to do. So I would say go to some management training classes, find a college where you can take those classes and learn how to actually manage human beings and manage organizations in ways that can make it effective. I don't understand why, honestly, we hire principals and superintendents and administrators in the way that we do. It makes no sense whatsoever to not actually train them in how to manage people. They're just highly qualified teachers or not highly qualified teachers who somehow managed to get into a spot because they were savvy enough to do it. It doesn't make any sense. You would never take a fry cook and put them in charge of a McDonald's without teaching them how to manage an organization. And that's what teaching essentially does. Not to compare teachers to fry cooks, but
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
one position versus the other position. It makes no sense.
You nailed it, man. Everything you're saying, you guys can't see me out there, but I'm nodding my head saying, yep, totally agree. Managing people, delegation. I mean, those are things we are working on daily here in my position. And you're right. They just don't have those experiences of doing those things. That
Right,
was
and
awesome.
it's not something you're born with. My wife always says I'm the most efficient delegator she's ever met, and I said it's just because I had to run a McDonald's restaurant and I couldn't do it alone. I just learned to do it because you have to do it, and they trained me how to do it. So you have to train people.
So I want to know, you kind of talked about it earlier, your daily routine. What does Matthew Dick's daily routine look like?
Well, I'll tell you, you get up at the same time every day. And if you're not getting up at the same time every day, you're doing terrible things to your body. So today's election day. I didn't have to get up, but I got up at 4:30 because that's the time I get up every single day. And if you get up at the same time every day, your eyes just basically open at that time. So I get up early at 4:30 and I feed the cats and I pet them because spending time with pets makes you feel better. And I meditate until the cats are done eating and they jump on my lap, and then I can't meditate anymore. And then I write. I write a blog. I've written a blog post every single day since 2007. Uh, it's my first writing of the day. It's like my warm up. I have to find something worthy of saying every single day. And then after I write that, I start working on a book or, a column. I write columns for Slate and humor columns for magazines. So I work on that, from, well, let's say like, you know, 5. I work on it for a couple hours, and then my kids get up and I feed them breakfast, and then I go to school on a weekday. If it's during the school year, I head off to school and I teach until, I get to school around 8. I used to stay a little later. Now with COVID, I leave the building immediately because I don't want to get COVID. So I leave at 3:30, 4 o'clock every day. If I can, I go hit 100 golf balls because the range is right next to my school. If not, I take a bike ride because we should exercise every day, not because we want to be in good shape, but it's good for brain health, and it keeps you in shape too, but it's great for your brain. If you're not exercising, you're a fool. Um, and then I make dinner, or my wife is making dinner for the family, and we always have a family dinner. And then I play with the kids, and I write a little bit more maybe before they go to bed if they're doing homework. And then I wrestle with my son on the bed and put him to bed. And then my wife and I, about half the week, will eventually sit down for an hour of television. And the other half of the week we don't, because we're working on our storytelling company, or she's knitting and playing the ukulele and, I don't know, doing all the things that she does over there. And we sit across from each other at the dining room table because that's how it is. And I'm working on a book, and maybe she's working on her kindergarten lesson for the next day because she's new to kindergarten. I've been teaching 5th grade for 12 years. So, I mean, it's not that hard at this point for me to be planned for the next day. So she might be planning a lesson, but she might be knitting or sewing or ukuleleing or doing lots of the things that she does, because she'll tell you she's not like me, but she is. She does a lot of things. And we'll spend most of the night that way until, 10:30, 11 o'clock. One of us will eventually say, all right, it's time to go to bed. And then we go to bed. Those are the weekdays.
Wow. And you got 2 kids too, right?
I do. Yeah, they're great.
What are the ages?
11 and 8.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, they're wonderful.
Yeah, and they keep you up. I mean, pretty busy. You're already stocked with all kinds of stuff you got going throughout the day, but I imagine, you've got some things with them as well going on too.
I do. They're disappointing to me sometimes. They're a bit of homebodies. They take a little after my wife. Like, I couldn't get my son to play golf with me the other day because it was too cold, and admittedly no one wanted to play on the planet because it was too cold for everyone but me. My daughter is a reader and a consumer of content constantly. She will just read and watch YouTube videos on educational topics all of her life if she could. And she dances a little bit. She plays a little soccer, but really she is a reader, and she just wants to know everything, and she retains everything. It's sort of frustrating and disgusting. And my son just is really happy playing with the neighborhood kids and playing with Legos. We just love kicking the crap out of each other. We fight and wrestle all the time. He plays baseball now, but COVID has sort of ruined all that right now too. So we're pretty happy just hanging out, and he's playing golf now when it's warm enough for him. That's nice. Yeah, they keep me busy though. The rule in the house for me at least is it doesn't matter what I'm doing. if my son or my daughter appear and say, would you like to? It doesn't matter what I'm doing, everything gets dropped. And the answer is yes. If they walked into this office right now and they said, Dad, you have to come and play a game with us, I might say, like, we have to wrap this up a little bit, because that is just the rule, because I know the 100-year-old version of myself
Sure.
is
Yeah.
going to say, you better spend every minute you have with those kids,
Cool.
because they're going to grow up on you before you know it.
Cool.
Yeah.
You've given us quite a few tips for being successful, but I'm going to ask you one more time. The question is, what is one tip you have for helping others be successful?
I think that what I tell people all the time is, there is the thing that you're doing, and then there's the next thing you're going to be doing. And if you don't have the answer for the next thing you're going to be doing, and if you're not working on that next thing you're going to be doing, you're making a terrible mistake. So it doesn't matter what it is, it could be anything. It could be golf. It could be that I'm working as a teacher, and the next thing I'm going to do is learn how to play golf, which used to be one of those things that I did. And then it had to become something else, because you just can't keep learning to play golf. There comes a point where you can keep working on it, but you have to have the next thing. And so the reason that, like, you list all of those things that I've done and all the things you haven't listed that I've done is because I'm just always looking for the next thing. And I get nervous when I don't have the next thing. So I always tell people, like, in terms of your profession, you should be spending, 90% of your effort, your energy and mind space on the thing you're doing, which for me is teaching. And as I've become a teacher over 22 years, it just requires less mind space and less effort, on my part. COVID accepted. This year's a little different. So, it needs to be something else. And as long as it's something else, you're always going to be moving forward, regardless of what it was. For a while, for me, for 3 years, it was learn how to trade stocks, learn how the markets work. And for 3 years, I did that before I ever bought a stock. And now I'm a serious investor. And most people don't even know it, because I did it sort of on the side, and I don't like to say positive things about myself, but I'm doing exceptionally well in the market because I spent 3 years of intense study before I ever bought a single share. And now that I'm investing, I move on to the next thing. So always be looking for the next thing that you're going to do, whether that thing becomes your new big thing. Someday I will not be a teacher anymore. I'm probably going to move on from teaching in maybe 5 years. My money people think it's a waste of my time now, because I could make more money doing other things, but I kind of love kids. But, whether it's going to be your new big thing or it's just going to be another side thing you do, I just think that's the way to be successful, is to always be looking ahead at the next thing you can be doing. Complacency is going to kill you. Don't be complacent, and don't think that the thing you're doing should be the only thing you're doing. You should be looking for something that's sort of not like the thing that you're doing, and go try that.
So I got to ask you, I was doing some Robin Hood stuff with the stocks there for a couple of years ago. What's one under the radar stock you would throw at us? What's one you got any recommendations for us?
Well, I think if you're looking for an under the radar stock, you're just asking for trouble.
True,
I
true.
I believe in buying really solid companies and holding them for a very long period of time.
You're the Warren Buffett, huh?
Yeah, kind of. If you were starting to buy stocks, I would tell you to buy a basket of MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, and Square. I would say buy those 4 stocks.
Oh,
And if you
okay.
just do that, you're going to do great. Those are the first 4 stocks that I bought. My portfolio now has, maybe 30 stocks in it. But those have performed brilliantly for me, because if you believe, as I do, that eventually we're going to become a cashless society, and COVID has accelerated that to an enormous degree. Eventually, we're not going to walk around with bills in our pockets anymore. Someone's going to have to deal with those financial transactions, and those are the 4 companies that are going to do it. So invest where the money is going.
God, you came here for education. You're getting stock tips. You're getting.
Well, what you said was so good, because Robinhood, or any of the other ones now, you can trade stocks. You can buy stocks for free now, which is remarkable. I can't tell you how often I'm in 7-Eleven and I'm standing behind someone who's spending $40 on scratch tickets. And I want to pull that person aside and say, listen, put Ameritrade or put Robinhood on your phone right now. And instead of buying $40 in scratch tickets, buy $40 in Apple, or $40 in Visa, or $40 in Salesforce, any of these companies that are going to be around for a long time and will profit you in the end. I just wanted to, like, if you want to be a gambler, which is what these scratch ticket people want to do, investing is sort of like intelligent gambling. I realize that every time I buy a stock, I'm risking losing everything. But if I understand how things work over time, I realize I'm not going to lose everything. I'm going to be, I'm going to be fine. Do that. That's what I want people to do. So even if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're thinking like, that's far beyond anything I understand, it's not. It's not. There are podcasts that you can listen to, and there's books you can read, and just put it on your phone and buy $5 and in Visa and just watch what happens over time.
Where's the one place you would tell somebody to start with if they want to learn about stock market or trading?
I would go to the podcast Market Foolery. I would start right there. Yep. I listen to it every day.
Yep.
And then you listen to their weekend show too. But
yeah.
I would start right there. They directed me to what books to read, and they directed me to what other resources to follow, and they taught me everything I know. Or at least they taught me to learn everything I needed to know.
Well, gosh, this is the first. I love this stuff. I got into it for a while, and I don't have the. I've got the. I got a little bit of anxiety, and so it's tough for somebody to have a little bit of anxiety and try to do some stock picking. So, man, I could talk all day about some of that stuff. That's so fascinating. I love your tip there on those 4 stocks to get, but. 2 more questions here, and then I'm going to let you go. It's election night. You got kids wanting to wrestle, and you got the wife wanting to play the ukulele for you. So I will let you go here in a second. What of all the things you're working on, what would you say is the biggest goal you're working on right now?
There's so many. I mean, I'm working on books. Those would be the biggest in terms of time suck. I guess the thing I'm working on right now that I'm excited about, I'm working on a 1 hour or let's say 75-minute solo show. I want to have something ready to go when COVID is done. I want to be able to like hit the stage and have something ready and wonderful to put on a stage. I've done a couple solo shows before in very small ways with content that I already had. So I have a group of people who meet with me on Zoom every month, and they're helping me workshop my way through this large story. I was arrested and tried for a crime I didn't commit when I was young, and I ended up in jail for a little while and homeless. All these things happened to me. And so I'm trying to tell that large story over the course of 75 minutes in a funny, engaging, meaningful way. So I'm working on that. And I guess that's the thing I would love to take off, the most. That's the thing I'd like to see find wings. So that's the thing I'm sort of, a lot of my mental space is spent on, how am I going to transition from this to that? Should I get church pews for this scene? How should I address the set? Things like that.
Okay, Matthew, gosh, that's, is there anything else? We talked about a lot of different things. We're entertaining. Oh my gosh, this was outstanding. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you want the audience to know?
Well, I'll mention we have a podcast. So if you're interested in learning about storytelling, my wife and I produce a podcast. It used to be weekly till COVID sort of messed things up. And now we're less than weekly. We are whenever we can get to it. My wife actually, she got exposed to someone with COVID, so that set us way back. She ended up testing negative, but we have a podcast called Speak Up Storytelling. Every week we produce shows here in Connecticut, or at least we did till COVID. Now we're doing it virtually, but we recorded those shows. So on our podcast once a week or whenever it happens, we play one of those stories from our shows, and then we deconstruct it. We talk about what's working really well in the story, what's not. I always do a homework for life segment where I talk about one of my moments from the week and tell people how it could be a story someday. We get lots of listener questions, so we answer some of those questions. You get to hear my wife and me interact. The amazing thing is we get emails all the time from people who just say they listen to us because they want to hear us, hear our marriage sort of, I've had people say like, my fiance or my husband and I listen to the podcast because you disagree in a healthy way, and we're trying to learn to do that too. So I can't tell you how many people listen to us, not for the storytelling, but for just for listening to us be us, which is crazy, but very humbling. So if you want to learn more about storytelling though, that's a great place to do it every week. And we have more than 100 episodes, so it'll take you a long time to catch up.
So the last question is, where can our listeners connect with you online? You mentioned the website earlier. Is that the best place to go, or is there a social media site they should go to?
MatthewDix.com is the website. They can follow me on Twitter at Matthew Dix. They can follow me on Instagram at Matthew Dix. They can find me on Facebook at Matthew Dix, all of those places. I grab my name all the time. As soon as I see a new social media platform popping up, I grab my name instantly. And I also, here's a good tip for you. Grab the names of your children and your spouse. If you have children and you have not grabbed their .com name, if it still is out there, grab it now. What better gift to give an 18-year-old kid getting ready for high school is, by the way, I have your Twitter handle, I have your Instagram handle, and I have a website for you. You know, both of my children, Clara Dix and CharlieDix.com, they're both secured and ready to go. I've secured their Twitter handles. I've secured their Instagram handles. It's a nice thing to be able to give to someone someday when they're ready for it. Neither one of my kids are ready for it yet. They don't even have phones yet, but someday they will be happy to have those things if those platforms are still in existence.
Yeah, true. But I've never heard that before. That's such a good idea. Gosh, you got so many just practical ideas that make so much sense. So, hey, Matthew, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has just been, I knew you'd be an entertaining guest and you did not disappoint. So keep doing great things. I can't wait for that next book to come out. And yeah, man, just enjoy the night there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to do this. It was really a great talk.
Thank you, Matthew.